Hey, good evening everyone. Welcome to Evening Dhamma. Tonight we have Q&A, questions and answers. And we have 21 questions on the site, so it's a little bit discouraging because you think, well, after all this time, not after all this time, but it's a sign that, well, sometimes there are legitimate questions, but oftentimes we get a lot of questions, and a lot of questions is a sign that your meditation might not be going so well. Because through extensive meditation practice, a lot of your questions are answered. And a lot of the questions I answer on here are, of course, just, hey, just meditate on it. But in the beginning, there's a requirement sometimes for more than just a direct answer, right? You need encouragement, not just how do I solve this, but how do I want to solve this? How do I want to apply the solution? So encouragement to take the effort that if you do this, it really will solve your problems, that kind of thing. Some sort of explanation is sometimes necessary. Anyway, not complaining. It's great actually to have so many questions. But just a caution that asking questions isn't going to solve your problems. Asking questions is good in the beginning, but your problems are not going to be solved by anything I tell you. And I think that's a problem. I was saying to someone today that he was asking me about, he wanted help, and I said, well, I can help you if you're willing to put in the work. And I said, when I was young, when I was looking for my answers way back when, I thought that someone could tell me something and that would solve my problems, and that's not the case. Nothing anyone tells you is ever going to solve your problems. Not the Buddha, not me. Well, if not the Buddha, then certainly not me. Okay, so anyway, that being said, we have questions, and we have 23 now, two new questions. Okay, so I click this button, and it spins. Oh, there we go. When I'm noting in meditation, I note I think, then I say thinking. You should say thinking is probably better. The question would be, how long should I think, noting down? I have the feeling that I simply observe what happens without the awareness that I can achieve greater calming situation. Maybe this method, I mean, it's a common criticism or comment. Yeah, it would be more calming if you didn't have to be objective, or if you didn't have to sort of create this objectivity, if you could just follow after and make it comfortable. But we're not trying to be calm. This isn't meant to be easy. It's meant to challenge you. So the fact that you feel disturbed by this is actually, it's a good thing in a way. I mean, in the sense that it shows you how you get disturbed by being objective. We'd much rather just divert our attention to something else, or keep our attention on one object, that kind of thing, and not incredibly valuable to do that. I mean, in the long term, it just becomes addictive. So, as far as this method not being for you, I mean, it's not really what I would say is that it has a specific nature and a specific result, and the results are much deeper than anything that's going to calm you down. So, for you, not for you. I mean, I guess it depends on your goals. If you just want to feel calm, then it's not going to bring you that. But if you want to truly change the way you look at things and learn to overcome your reactions, well, then you've got to deal with your reactions, and so it's going to be uncomfortable, potentially very uncomfortable. How do I deal with boredom? What do I do if my interest in the Dhamma falls because I'm bored of it and my motivation slowly dies? Well, boredom is an important meditation object for us to focus on. So, I mean, meditation isn't something you should be excited about, or it should be. It's not something you really can be excited about because it's work and it's challenge. We meditate not because it's something we're excited or thrilled about, but because we're shocked and concerned about the state of our mind, like boredom. Boredom is something that should concern you very much because it's a reaction, it's an inability to stay with something. So the fact that you're a person who gets bored is a reason to meditate, because boredom is troubling, boredom is problematic. It's part and parcel to a lot of our unwholesome and unpleasant states of mind. So really you would meditate on the boredom. I mean, boredom is not anything special, it's just another state, like anything else. And anything that takes you away from meditation becomes an adequate or a useful object of meditation. Here's a question about therapist. I read this and I don't really understand. I don't understand it. I mean, first of all, it doesn't really interest me what therapists have to say, because they can say anything. But I think there's a point in here that's sort of a challenge to Buddhism, I guess, that there are things that we can't be mindful of. Part of what shape our personality, even though we're not aware of them. Well, a lot of what shapes our personality is physical, right? And so the brain is just physical, it's just matter. But the nature of the brain can shape us. I mean, we are fed the stimuli from the brain, and that's what they call the subconscious. It's not really anything to do with consciousness, it's just stimuli. The brain is an organ and it feeds the mind stimuli, and the mind reacts. And so our reactivity is going to be shaped, and our habits are going to be shaped by the stimuli. Like if someone has nightmares all the time, well, they're much more likely to become to be changed by those nightmares, and so their reactions will change. I mean, the mind is shaped. The mind, because it's not able to react objectively, it's shaped by the things that it reacts to. So anything to do with things that we're not aware of, if you're not aware of it, like truly not conscious of it, then it's not consciousness, it's not mind, it's physical, if anything. It's conceptual. I reached a point of being mindful of being mindful. I'm not really sure what this means. I don't know how your object becomes mindful. You'd be better off saying knowing, knowing something. You have an awareness arise. Oh, I'm aware that I'm being mindful. Then focus on the awareness and say knowing. Should I always stick to the breath? No, the breath is not something special. How would I know if the thought coming to me is insight? Thoughts are not insight. Insight is the change in our perception of things. Whereas before you saw things as stable, satisfying, and controllable, insight is seeing things as now unstable, unsatisfying, and uncontrollable. And as you start to see that, and you stop holding on to things as me, as mine, as under my control, and so on, that's the path of insight, of what we call vipassana. Which insight, remember, insight, it literally means seeing clearly. Keep that in mind. We talk about insight meditation. What we mean is meditation for seeing clearly. And the problem is that seeing things as stable, satisfying, and controllable is not seeing clearly. That's the problem. Seeing in that way is the problem. I've noticed that although I am less worried about my children, my vigilance towards their better education also has lowered. It seems to go hand in hand, and that would be very problematic, not to me maybe, but to my kids. Well, not necessarily. Higher education doesn't make you happier, and if your kids, as a result of you not caring for their higher education, are less ambitious themselves, I mean, in some ways that's a good thing. If they become a person who sells pots on the side of the road, maybe they'll be at peace with that. I mean, we need a lot less to survive than we think we do. I mean, maybe that's naive in some sense, because there are many menial jobs that prevent you or make problems for you in terms of being able to have free time to meditate. But I doubt that's the case. I would say a mindful parent or mindful parents are much more likely to raise children who are more conscious of what's important, and higher education is not one of those things that's important. So they'll be conscious and they'll find ways to live their lives that allows them to be more mindful or more spiritual. Okay, here's a question that's important. I normally don't want to talk about other people, but this is a current event, and it's something as a Buddhist I guess I have to say something about. I'm reluctant to, because I don't really know the situation. So the situation is what's going on in Myanmar and the Rohingya Muslims. And I don't really know the situation. I mean, I get the feeling that there is some defense by the Myanmar Burmese people that the Muslims are stirring up trouble as well. I don't know if that's, some people say that's just propaganda. It may very well be. I don't know the situation. I don't want to suggest that it's an equal, a dichotomy in the sense that both sides are equally to blame. I get the sense that quite clearly the Myanmar government is very much to blame, and that there are nationalistic Buddhist monks, I understand, that are mixing nationalism and Buddhism and violence as well, and all in the name, I guess, of protecting Buddhism. It's the same sort of similar thing that the monks felt in Sri Lanka against the Tamil Hindus. So I don't think there's any question that I'm very much against violence, and any Buddhist worth their salt should be very much against this sort of violence. I mean, it's wrong. Even if you're in some perverse way trying to protect Buddhism. I think there was more of a case for that in Sri Lanka, because the Tamils were quite clearly acting as terrorists, blowing stuff up and so on. And I don't know, and maybe in south of Thailand where they were hacking monks, they were taking machetes to monks. Even in Bangladesh, someone was telling me, which, you know, this is the border of Bangladesh. Buddhist monks are being cut up with machetes as they walk down the street and that kind of thing. So, but even the point is, even in that case, there is no place for violence in Buddhism. I mean, it's unfortunate that Buddhists are suffering, and I mean, in the Myanmar case, I don't even think that's true. But even that wouldn't be a reason. I mean, there's never a good reason to get angry or to act cruelly. If you just a cursory reading, really the Jatakas are the best example of this. All the Jatakas where the Bodhisattva practiced patience against those who tried to hurt him. The Buddha's teachings surrounding Devadatta, who was a great... one monk I heard at least said that Devadatta performed a great service for Buddhism in terms of showing how great the Buddha was, how great his compassion was, and how great his patience was. I think we're very short-sighted. But I don't think that has so much to do with Myanmar, Burma. I mean, I think there's much more to do, and as I understand, Myanmar has had a long history of cruel, genocidal governments that just, I don't know, I mean, maybe even use Buddhism as a tool, but are much more interested in control and power and are very much threatened by autonomous groups, not just the Rohingya. I think there was the Shan state, before it was, I think they were Christians, the Shan state Christians. So, I mean, Myanmar, at the time when Mahasi Sayadaw was teaching, apparently it was a great place, democracy, and the president was a practicing Buddhist meditator under Mahasi Sayadaw, or under various monks, I don't really know. The prime minister. And then it all went to crap. I don't know how. Probably some sort of external influence trying to corrupt the government, and then a military dictatorship, and for many years it was... I don't know. I mean, I'm not the expert on these topics, but I think that's the point, is it has much more to do with geopolitical maneuvering and the psychopathy of fascism and government, often in general. It seems that the only people that want to lead any country are the people who have no compassion or sense of empathy, unfortunately, which is, it's a dilemma, really, because the only ones who could ever have the power to do good have no interest in doing good, and anyone who has the power has no interest, has the power to do good, has no interest in politics. So is the Rohingya chapter going to be a vital concern? Perhaps, but Buddhism isn't changed by the fact that Buddhists do bad things. What would be changed is when we start to defend these bad things. There's going to be people who misinterpret Buddhism, both inside and out, but Buddhism isn't hurt by that. Yeah, the future, it's true, the future of Buddhism will be hurt. It'll probably shorten and corrupt and make fewer people interested in Buddhism, for example. But that's the nature of things, Everything is, everything becomes, what did the Buddha say? Everything is of the nature to fade away. And he meant the Dhammas. He meant not the Dhamma, but his teaching as well. How does one cultivate equal love to all beings? Equal love to all beings. Well, it's really quite simple. I mean, in theory, it's just a matter of doing just that. I mean, you can start small, but eventually there's lots of, you can look up on the internet, there's lots of chants that you would just repeat to yourself until you are able to equally love all beings. Really nothing mysterious about it. You just sit there and repeat. Mantras are very useful. Repeat the mantras one sentence at a time. Repeat one sentence 1,000 times with feeling, right? And then move on to the next sentence and so on. It's quite a systematic approach. It's really, in meditation, a systematic approach is generally good, no matter what technique, samatha, vipassana, metta, and so on. Systematic is the way to go. Does the development of metta assist in the understanding of anatta? No, not really, no. Because metta relies on beings. I mean, perhaps there's some argument to the fact that you're no longer conceited because you're concerned with other beings' happiness. But anatta is so much different. Anatta is a quality of sankhara, which are experiences or formations. And metta doesn't deal with sankhara. My movements while walking used to be close to normal speed. Now we move much slower, doing things slowly and gently like an invalid child would, not normal speed. Mahasi Sayadaw does say that. I think the point is that naturally you'll be a lot slower. I mean, if you look at someone walking down the street, that's not how fast you should be walking. But If it feels slow, you're probably too slow. If it feels fast, you're probably too fast. I mean, the point is those feelings should be noted. And when you note them, you'll stop pushing to be slower or pushing to be faster. But I think naturally you slow down. I mean, certainly even the very first day of meditating, you're going to be walking a lot slower. It takes you a lot longer to get from one side of the room to the other than it normally would. But we're going really slow is something you should note, the feeling of it. After meditating, I am feeling that people are very materialistic and see everything in gain and loss. I'm unable to deal with them. So unable to deal with people. I mean, on the one hand, stay away from people. That's always a good thing. But on the other hand, learning to be more tolerant and less judgmental. Yeah, it's true that probably what they're doing is wrong. Being materialistic is not good for them, but what does that have to do with you? To you, it's just like birds in the forest. Cheap, cheap, cheap. Just be mindful of it. After doing meditation for an hour and being mindful in my daily life, I feel very tired, too much sleepy. What should I do as part of the practice? Well, you're not tired. There's a lot of changes that happen, or ups and downs that you go through in the beginning of a meditation practice. It's going to change. So when you feel tired, just note tired. There's lots of reasons. One is maybe you're putting out too much effort, you're pushing too hard. So it's a learning process. Another is just the balance. I mean, if your daily life is very energetic and for the mind or the body, you'll be tired when you meditate. It's just another experience. You try to be mindful of it. Is it true the Buddha said the highest punishment is to ignore? I mean, it's not exactly what he said. It was in the context of one monk who... It's in the context of monastic society and in the context of Buddhism. So there was one monk who was acting very egotistical, and the Buddha said, give him the Brahmadanda, which roughly does translate as the highest punishment. Brahma is God, right? That means the highest. And danda is punishment. Stick, it literally means. So the stick of Brahma. But it means the punishment, the highest punishment, the ultimate punishment. And the ultimate punishment was for all the monks to ignore him. Let him do what he wants, but no one teach him. No one instruct him, no one guide him. Right? And it was like death, because it's considered death in the Buddha's teaching, because he had no potential for gain, for improvement. And the Buddha gave this punishment just before he passed away, and it worked on this monk. This monk was actually Channa, who I guess was the Channa who left with the Bodhisattva, and because he was with the Bodhisattva when he went forth, he was conceited and thought he was something special. And when the Buddha sent Ananda to punish him in this way, he felt ashamed, and he changed, and he asked apology. And Ananda said, I think he became an arahant first, and then he went and asked apology, and Ananda said, when you became an arahant, it was enough apology, something like that. Is the mind destroyed when you become enlightened, or is it just the ego? Is the ego a part of the mind, or vice versa? Neither of those things exist. Those are concepts. The mind is not a thing, nor is the ego. What is destroyed when one becomes enlightened? Ignorance is destroyed. The potential for the arising of defilements is destroyed. I mean, enlightenment just is a change. It's like you're on a train on this track, and it's going onto another track. Or maybe even going off the track, so there's no more going of the train. If the train is not on the track, it can't go anywhere. So don't be mistaken by that, misled by that sort of simile. I mean, the train is a thing that exists. The mind is not a thing. What we're talking about is experiences, and the chain of experiences changes, so that when you experience something, there can be no reaction of liking or disliking, of ego or attachment to it as me or mine, because of wisdom. Does enlightened being know that they are enlightened? If asked, would enlightened being acknowledged? Yes, they know, and generally they wouldn't acknowledge. But it depends. Some do, I suppose. Could you tell us more about the monk Mahasi Sayadaw? What makes him so great? And do you think he was a Sotapanna or even beyond? So what makes him so great is that he was both a scholar and a meditator. He was maybe more of a scholar than a meditator, I don't know. But he was certainly a great teacher of both Dhamma and meditation. He had something very clear about the way he teaches. I mean, it may require you to practice his meditation teachings, but if you practice in this tradition, I can pretty much guarantee that you're going to like what he has to say. It jives, it resonates so well with our tradition, with the actual practice, that I've never read anything that I found similarly inspiring or just razor edge clear than what Mahasi Sayadaw wrote. So, and it's plentiful. Like, he wasn't just a meditation teacher, he wrote a lot and gave a lot of talks that were transcribed. And back then it was the golden age of Burmese Buddhism. There were people translating it into English, so we have a lot of English translations of his talks, which is rare and exceptional. Was he a Sotapanna or more? I'm not going to comment on that. You talk about being celibate, to choose celibacy because it helps our practice and keeps our mind pure. Can it be kept for a longer period if it's just avoiding suppressing? It can be. Well, it's not really avoiding suppressing, it's just going to be a struggle. And the struggle is unpleasant. And the Buddha said, well, that unpleasantness is not bad. You know, struggling and feeling, wanting something and not getting it, and wanting it again and not getting it, and feeling this stress is useful because it shows you the stress involved with not getting what you want. It's not ideal. It's not, of course, the best state, but it's more of a preliminary state. Celibacy only really works if you're meditating. I mean, if you're not, you're just going to break your celibacy. So, I mean, eventually it changes. Is there something else? Mindfulness is the obvious. Oh, do you have any advice how to manage the physical side of celibacy? Physical side. Yeah, I mean, being mindful of the feelings. Not just of the wanting, but of the actual physical pleasure and not just pleasure, but the fever, the heat, the sweat, the smell. Yeah, it's all part and parcel. Be mindful of it all. And I mean, this is a huge. If you were born as a human, it's clear that you had sexual desire. So there's no way to be born as a human otherwise. So something that could take lifetimes. So something that's always going to go away in this life. Something you should be patient about. That's why the Buddha said, unless you're dedicated to becoming a monk, you don't have to be celibate. Not all the time. How do Buddhists deal with cockroaches? Oh, I have lots of cockroach stories. I mean, they're not long stories, but you know, I would wake up. I've told this story before, but I remember one time waking up and there's a twitching feeling on, and there was a cockroach on my mouth. Big one, you know, big Thai cockroaches, and I just thwacked it off, turned on the light. And so what I would do is I had a plastic cup and I would run around my room trying to catch it. And I would catch the cockroach and put it outside. I caught a lot of cockroaches and put them outside. It was that was the last straw. I couldn't live with them after that, after it got on my mouth. They're pretty gross creatures. They get all this goo on their back. I don't know what that is. Eggs, maybe. They're pretty awful creatures. I mean, they're not awful, but not really easy to live with them. When is the next Buddha due? Don't know. Long time. Long time. They say, well, our lifespan will be 10,000 years. That's what the texts say. So wait until technology has advanced to the point where it can extend our lives to 10,000 years. Once that happens, there's a chance. We're getting there. The figures that I see in my meditation, faces, voices, this question is not the greatest English, unfortunately. Okay. See faces and voices, hear voices, I guess, has a strong persona, so the forms of Mara. I know it, but these voices will be in control, or is this going to happen forever? So if you hear voices and see faces, they're not in control, you just be mindful of them. They're in control because we react to them, and the reaction takes over. You're afraid, or you're, angry or hating, usually fear, worry, anxiety. So note all of that. Note your reactions when you see voices, see faces, say seeing, seeing. When you hear voices, say hearing, hearing. They don't really have power over you. I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that a spirit could take possession of your body, but even the body, if the body goes against you and you no longer have control over it, it's still just experiences. Nothing can take over your mind. Is compassion different from empathy or mercy? What exactly is compassion and mind state and practical deed point of view? So I don't know. Empathy is, they're just words, right? And we don't use the word empathy so much. Empathy is feeling what other people are feeling, I guess, and that's not a good thing. I mean, you don't ever feel what other people feel. You react and echo it, or you react, you see what they're experiencing and you react with a similar feeling. Not good. If someone's sad and you get sad, that's actually negative. But compassion is technically in Buddhism defined as wishing for people to be free, wishing for beings to be free from suffering, having an inclination to alleviate the suffering of other beings. So in practical deeds, it's the deeds that you do to alleviate the suffering of others. Does coffee or tea fall under the fifth precept? No, not in my mind, because unless you take a lot of it, because we're talking about things that are on the level of alcohol, really. Majja pamadatthana. No, pamadatthana, right? That are a basis for getting drunk, really, intoxicated. Coffee doesn't intoxicate you. It can make you giddy and excited, but the point about the precepts is they're not commandments. It's not like the Buddha said, thou shalt not. He said, one undertakes. So it's up to you. What does the fifth precept mean to you? Or what are you promising? Are you promising not to drink coffee? Well, then it's included there. But did the Buddha intend it in when he talked about the five precepts? No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a gray area, I suppose, but it's not something I would concern with. I mean, the point being, just because you're keeping the five precepts doesn't mean you're doing everything right. So, okay, it's not under the five precepts, great, I can drink as much coffee as I want. Well, we've had meditators go crazy from drinking too much coffee, or part of it was they drank 10 cups of coffee trying to stay awake, and certainly problematic. But is it something you should generally consider that you're promising when you keep the five precepts? I would say generally not. I would say it's sort of an extra thing if you say, coffee's problematic, I'm going to stay away from it or minimize it. It's also good. Are we getting more questions as I answer them? There's still 10 left. I feel like I've answered a lot already. That's fine. Only half an hour, so it's still good time. How to handle a phobia, for example, driving into a deserted area alone at night. Okay, well, read my booklet on how to meditate. I'm going to shorten some of these because they're really just about being mindful. If you have a phobia, well, you're afraid, so that would be saying to yourself, afraid, afraid. I'm unable to live in a monastery. I have a busy school life. My question is there any set time that you should meditate? It's good to have a schedule, keep you disciplined. So in the morning and night, that's a good schedule. I'm not going to commit to anything. I've been asked this question before. But schedule is good in my mind because of the discipline it brings. So you figure out a schedule. The other thing is, doing morning and evening means less time in between practices. If you just do once a day or all at one time a day, there's a lot of time when you're not doing any practice. And again, it has to actually seep into your psyche. So twice a day is spaced out is good. Can you elaborate on the definition of ignorance? Ignorance means not knowing, specifically not knowing the Four Noble Truths. Chatunang Arya Satchanang Yatha Bhutanga Dasana. And through not seeing the Four Noble Truths as they are, we're reborn again and again. I mean, it's like you want me to give you wisdom, you want me to free you from ignorance. Ignorance just means not knowing. So insight meditation helps you know. I have found reciting the 8 mundane concerns helps with boredom. Is this okay? I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's a trick, and tricks are useful in the beginning, like training wheels. But it's not a. If you're intent upon finding tricks that help you. So I'm not discouraging you from that. I'm just cautioning you that's not going to solve the boredom. It can be useful in the beginning until you're able to really commit yourself to being mindful of the boredom and just saying bored. There's really no other way. Not answering that. Is the path of dry insight without jhana attainment the best approach for most people? Would you ever personally consider training someone in both aspects of samatha and vipassana practice? That's a good question. I mean, it's certainly simpler to just teach without the jhana, without samatha meditation involved. I would not teach samatha because I've never really been trained in it, and I've certainly not been trained in how to teach it. Although the Visuddhimagga is a good sort of manual for that. It's not that technically difficult. I have hypothesized that it would be pretty easy for me to teach samatha meditation. It's not hard. I mean, I'm a proficient teacher in terms of getting people to do what I say, and explaining things to people and coaching them, guiding them. I can do that, so it wouldn't be hard to teach samatha. I don't think it's worth it. I teach people insight, and that's the core, that's the gold. So to teach people silver, it creates complications. I mean, the biggest complication with samatha is everyone wants to do it, and then people get sidetracked by it and distracted by it and obsessed with it, and it makes things more complicated, I suppose. Can you give some information on reincarnation? Should all Buddhists believe in this? So I recommend you to watch my videos on rebirth. There's one also called The Nature of Reality that I tried to address this in. But it's just such a detailed topic that I don't want to just answer it here. I mean, I end up answering this a lot, and it's not easy to answer. So I encourage you to, rather than repeat myself in length. But your question about should all Buddhists believe is a good question. I think it's a different question. So, I mean, belief in it is good, and I've answered given this sort of answer before. Belief in things that are true is good, in the sense that your belief is in line with reality. So if I believe in rebirth without really knowing it or having any evidence or having any sense that it's true, that belief is going to be functionally, practically good, because I'll align my life and my practices according to that reality. But I mean, I think that's not satisfactory to someone who doesn't believe in it, because they're not sure of what I'm saying. And I say it's good because it's true. But, well, they don't know if it's true. And if you don't know if it's true, I think that's the problem, is you can't just force yourself to believe something. So I think what happens, rather, is people become very confident. They read the Buddha's teaching and they see him talking about rebirth so much that they say, okay, well, if the Buddha believed in rebirth, or believed, the Buddha taught and claimed rebirth to be a thing, that makes it believable. And they start to believe and sort of align their lives and their practices in that accordingly. Well, that's a good thing, because it's true. Should all Buddhists believe it? So all people should believe in it. The question is, how do you get people to believe in something? The best way is to provide evidence and have them gain knowledge of it for themselves. With rebirth, that's of course thought to be tricky. It's not as tricky as people think, and it's not as impossible. That's what I've tried to do with some of my videos, to explain how meditation can certainly give you a different perspective on rebirth. But I'm not going to go into it, sorry. I recommend watching some of my videos. Hopefully they've done an adequate job of that. I know in my heart that I will end up in a Buddhist monastery, and I really want to live my life, but my mom is skeptical and doesn't really want me to go. What should I do? I'm getting more and more questions. I'm just never going to leave here tonight. Okay, my mom doesn't want me to go to a Buddhist monastery. You should meditate. Do a meditation course. You shouldn't try to become a monk. If I were your mother, I'd be skeptical. I'm skeptical. Hearing you say this, I'm skeptical. Because I've had lots of students try that, and a lot of them fail. They're too obsessed with becoming a monk or ordaining or living in a Buddhist monastery, and they are not at all prepared for the meditation practice. So change your focus. I'm not impressed by the fact that you want to become a monk. I'd be much more impressed by the fact that you were dead set on doing lots of meditation practice and had no mention of living in a monastery, etc. I'm very skeptical, along with your mother. Do a meditation course and then we'll talk. I mean, maybe you have. Do lots of meditation courses. I think things with your mother will probably change once you've done a lot of meditation. She'll either throw her hands up in the air and say she can't even understand you anymore because you're so different, or else she'll start to appreciate. If she's got some goodness in her, she'll start to appreciate the good things that meditation has done for you, and she'll be more inclined to let you become a monk, if that's what eventually happens. A few weeks ago I meditated for the first time. I had a profound experience. I was shown by this woman, my past life. A woman in my vision. That's interesting. Someone showed you the life of Buddha. What could it mean? I don't know. Maybe it's maybe in a past life I don't know. The universe is full of strange things. I'm now able to refocus my energy and make something happen. For example, I made a deer flip over a car after refocusing my energy. That's impressive. I mean, if it's true, that's an impressive thing. I mean, it's not insight meditation. If you're interested in what I teach, I'd recommend you reading my booklet. So we don't look for meaning in things. We try to be objective. So when you have an experience, you are mindful of it. I'd recommend reading my booklet, because samsara is infinite, or appears to be. And so lots of things, anything could happen theoretically. Oh wait, not going to answer that one. I mean, I'm deleting a couple of questions here, not because they're bad questions, but because they're not really relevant. Did I do this? They're about me, about my life. Not really what this is for. If you want to get to know me, well, tough luck, I suppose. You'd have to come and live with me, and even then, forget about me. I'm not important. I guess people sometimes want an example. They want to look at me and say, what's he like? Could I be like that? Should I be like that? How do I be like that? How do I live like him? I get that. I mean, I understand that. I don't think it's as properly guided as we think. I would much more recommend focusing on the teachings than on people. In parinirvana, all six senses cease to exist anymore. So, yes, but be clear that they never existed. They arise and cease. So, parinirvana means no more arising of the six senses. But each of the six senses is a momentary thing. If science alleviates all suffering, even going so far as to remove trivial desire from our psychology, would this be a good thing? Or should we accept suffering as it's useful? Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think, as I've said before, suffering doesn't lead to suffering. And so if science is dead set on alleviating suffering, I guess I would say in one sense they're ultimately going to fail, because it's not suffering that leads to suffering. But the other thing is, it's misguided, because it doesn't actually solve the problem. Is that saying the same thing? I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I was in school all day today, so my energy is starting to wane. But it's evil that leads to suffering. It's unwholesomeness. It's defilement. So you say science could remove desire from our psyche. Perhaps, to some extent, but it can't remove ignorance. It can't remove delusion, which leads to ego attachment, identification, which ultimately, eventually, will again produce desire and aversion. I mean, all these theoretical things that science could do and that science does with the brain and so on are very situational. Yes, science can do things with the brain, but the mind is so much more than that. So much out of reach that it's just not useful to think about that. I mean, it's quite clear when you meditate what's really going on in reality, and if you have this clear system. So science, these questions about science is like trying to circumvent the process that is quite clearly necessary to become enlightened. So I would never want to think that it was possible to circumvent this very clear and fundamental process of understanding reality. Do you think it's a bad idea to practice meditation techniques for awakening? I read from multiple sources that it needn't be progressive and only occur from more lengthy. I don't understand. I mean, I consider that what we practice is for awakening, but it is generally a lengthy process. Is it wrong to look up to the Buddha? No, it's very good to look up to the Buddha. As far as role models go, he's a good one. Okay? That's all the questions for tonight. Finally. That was a lot. Not bad questions. It was a lot of good questions. So, good. Thank you all for coming out. Have a good night.